In this video, we're going to go over what it took to get this motor and 4L80E transmission mounted up in this truck with a cab that came from a two-wheel drive. So there were some challenges here, unforeseen challenges. The first time I lowered the motor in, I didn't video it, but it didn't fit because that stupid Summit oil pan was too deep and it hit the front cross member. So it wasn't even close. There was no clearance there. So I could have either gone with a 1-inch body lift that I really didn't want to have to deal with because I didn't want to have to mess around with the steering shaft or the bumpers. The other option was to go with one of these ORD aftermarket front cross members. That's just a bolt in, so I decided to go that route. Gave me a lot more clearance. So we'll go over this whole process here: motor, transmission, transfer case. And we'll see what kind of modifications need to be done to get all this stuff to fit under a two-wheel drive cab. Today we're going to work on putting these ORD heavy-duty motor mounts and this heavy-duty cross member in the truck. The reason for that is because due to that stupid Summit Racing oil pan being too deep, it hits the cross member before it's even all the way down. So this cross member has to come out and the new one has to go in. That Summit oil pan I was talking about, you look at how deep that thing is in the front by the balancer compared to the stock pan. Stock pan is pretty shallow right here. That's only like 1 inch deep. But this other one is, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches. It's hard to see from this angle, but it's way too deep. So the first step, there's 2 bolts here, and then there's 2 bolts that tie these 2 pieces together. They're up underneath here. So we got to get those bolts out, and then there's rivets that'll have to be chiseled out there, and here, and here. Yep. I did finally get it to come through this way, barely. I thought I was going to have to cut it, but didn't have to. So there's a lot of rust and grime in there, so I'm going to end up cleaning all that stuff out. All right, I think I finally figured out how this thing goes. So on the passenger side, it uses this front hole here, and we're gonna have to take this bolt out right here. We'll use that. That'll be the back hole. And then the center hole up underneath here will have to get drilled in the frame. Then over here on the driver's side, you'll use this bolt here, has to get taken out. That's the back hole. And then 2 holes will have to be drilled in the frame because there's no hole up here. So we got to drill the 2 front holes on that side, drill the center hole on this side, and then take both of these bolts out back here, the back bolts. Cross members all bolted in. There's 2 bolts there, 2 bolts there, and then 3 across the bottom on each side. So now it's time for these heavy-duty motor mounts. Motor mounts are both in. The other half goes like this and gets bolted to the motor. All right, I got the brackets on the motor mount brackets, and I also got these other little small brackets on. Those are factory brackets that have rods that attach to them that go down to the transmission, this one. So I'm about to lower this thing in. Hopefully they line up. Well, motor was in. I just had to pull it back out because I had 2 problems. First problem was right there on that edge. It was hitting. It was rubbing up against that. It had this piece that just stuck out too far. So I had to cut that off. So hopefully we'll have enough clearance there now. And then the second thing was down here on the passenger side, there's this little heat shield thingy here that stuck out quite a ways, and that interfered with the header on this side, not by much. So I just kind of pounded it in. Hopefully flattened it out enough that I'll get clearance there now too. So we're gonna try this again. All right, this is the bracket that I'm talking about. That's because these bars right here go back and attach to the transmission. So that bracket has to be there because it's part of the support for the transmission. So I'm gonna have to kind of wallow these holes out a little bit, make them slotted towards the top, all three of these, so that whole bracket can move up just a little bit on both sides. All right, the motor is in. Motor mounts all line up. I oblonged the holes a little bit, so that worked. It's not quite sitting level because the truck is a little bit nose high. So I have it basically level to the point where it needs to be. And once I bring the nose down and bring the back end up a little bit, it should level out the carb flange. This is an empty case for a 4L80E transmission. It's the same transmission that's going to be going in the truck, but it's empty and it's pretty light. It's just aluminum. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to bolt that to the motor, and then I can use it to level the motor and level the drivetrain, and then I can build a transmission crossmember in here. Okay, here's the next challenge we're going to have to solve. So that's the best I can get on the transmission. Now I've got all kinds of clearance to the oil pan that I didn't have before, so that's great. And we have good clearance everywhere else, but the transmission hits. This is really baffling to me. I just can't understand how this could be this far off. After a little bit of reading, I guess it turns out these trucks come with a concept of a low hump or a high hump transmission tunnel. So I don't know all the details, but I guess certain trucks with smaller transmissions, the transmissions would fit under a low hump. So probably a lot of 1500 two-wheel drive trucks came that way. And then there's a high hump version for, I suppose, bigger motor combinations. Heavy-duty four-wheel drive trucks would have had the high hump. So I definitely have the low hump here because this cab came off a two-wheel drive truck. That's going to be the solution to that problem. All right, there goes nothing. That's how much taller that cover is from the stock. Quite a bit taller. Probably a better view here. Yeah, that shows pretty much exactly how much extra clearance. Yep, about good 2 inches extra. tried using the jack to raise this thing up in there, but it was impossible. It's such an oddball shape. It kind of has to float off the ground on the heavy side because this bolt hole has to be directly straight up in the air. And so you can see that thing would not sit flat on the jack at all. So I basically spent the last hour making this fixture to bolt it to out of 2x4s that holds it in exactly the right position. So now it'll stand up straight. It's held in just the right position that it needs to be in with this bolt hole right straight up at the top. So now I should be able to raise it right up in there. The reason I'm having to do so much cutting and fab work here is this is a 4L80E transmission. It's a 4-speed automatic out of a 1998 heavy-duty 2500 Chevy truck. So this is bigger and longer than anything that existed in the 80s. So this is kind of a custom deal. There's no cross member that this would fit. And this truck never had a cross member at all when I bought it. So I was either gonna have to buy one or make one. And I figured that since I'm putting in a transmission that doesn't belong in this year of truck, I'm probably just gonna end up having to make one. Pretty good looking weld. After a full day of cutting and grinding and welding and drilling, this is what I came up with. So this thing bolts on and it's got 5 holes per side. And then it's got a pretty deep drop down because this is where the front drive shaft goes through right here. And that's the mount where the transmission sits. The transmission mounting pad sits there. So, and it's heavy, man. This is probably 1/8 inch thick 2x4 steel tubing. It's beefy. This thing probably weighs 40 pounds. This is what it looks like in the truck. You can see that kick down there should clear the front drive shaft just fine. 60 degrees here today in February, which is pretty crazy. So I took this thing outside and painted it in the sunlight. So the finished product looks pretty good. Here's my cardboard template with that back section with a bunch of bends in it. It should get me about the clearance that I need in all the right spots. I'm going to cut that center tab out of there. Doesn't need to be there. So I need to transfer this to metal. That's a pretty easy way to make straight bends without going all the way out back to get the sheet metal break. It's just a small piece, so that's easy. We're pretty close here. I got this piece all bent and in place. It's got the right contours, so it'll clear the seat frame just fine. and it'll clear. As you can see that little tab that sticks up, I'm going to trim that off. So I'll actually be able to lower this even a little bit more. And then it covers the transfer case all the way to the back. So once I weld this in, I'll be able to push it down even a little more, about like that. So I'll weld it where I have about a 1/2 inch clearance. Sunday night, this is as far as I was able to get. I got this pretty much right where it needs to be. So I think I'm going to end this video here, and then I'll make another one when I get this all welded in and finished. Oh, and I did get the wiring harness all figured out. So the lights all work. Got them all sitting here. Headlights, tail lights, marker lights, turn signal lights, they all work. The horn works, everything works. So probably make a video on this too one day.